Previous video we studied the 3 stages of production, and in this video we're going to look at it in a slightly different way and look at a measure of input productivity called marginal product. First, let's briefly review the 3 stages of production. Here we have a graph with yield. We can say wheat yield on the y-axis and nitrogen fertilizer, which is an input into wheat production on the x-axis. And here we have a production function tracing out the relationship between nitrogen use and wheat yields. And for the most part, when you apply more nitrogen, you get more yield, but there does become a point when the nitrogen burns the plants and causes wheat yields to fall. And if we trace out the 3 stages of production on this graph, we'll see that it looks something like this, where the first stage occurs here, and that's where the slope of the tangent line, which is a measure of nitrogen productivity, is rising. And since the slope of the tangent line is rising, nitrogen is becoming more productive the more you use it. Then you have the second stage. And in the second stage, the slope of the tangent line, it's still positive, so nitrogen is increasing wheat yield, it's increasing output, but the slope of the tangent line is falling, which means that nitrogen is becoming less productive the more you use. And then finally you can have stage 3. Very few farmers would actually be in stage 3, but if they accidentally did, they would get to a point where the slope of the tangent line is negative, meaning as you apply more nitrogen, wheat yield actually starts to fall. Now it turns out the slope of these tangent lines, which we used as an indicator of the productivity of an input, it equals something called the marginal product. And the marginal product is this. It's a change in output from a 1 unit increase in input. It would be like saying if N goes up by 1, yield goes up by 3. If this was the case, the marginal product would equal 3. But we want to study marginal products pretty closely here. So we're going to go away from a graph and we're going to go to actual numbers. And this is something intended to mimic somewhat realistically wheat production. Here we have a chart, and as you can see, it has different levels of nitrogen use. The more nitrogen you put down, the more yield you usually get. There is an option in this first row here to not produce wheat, so we don't have to produce wheat, but in this video this isn't going to be important for us. What we want to look at is trade-off between, not the trade-off, but as we put more nitrogen, we want to ask how much more yield do we get. And let's recall our definition of marginal product, which is the change in output. Output here is yield, because that's what we're producing. From a 1 unit increase in input, here our input is nitrogen fertilizer. Now, if you look at nitrogen fertilizer use, it doesn't ever increase by 1. It goes in increments of 10, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30. What this means is we have to get kind of a cruder calculation of marginal product. We have to look at marginal product between intervals like 0 to 10, 10 to 20, that kind of thing. This is probably a little confusing right now, but once we actually do some examples, crunch some numbers, this will become much clearer. Okay. We're going to go ahead and actually calculate some marginal products. What we'll do first is we'll say, what happens if we start off with no nitrogen fertilizer being put on the ground, and then we apply 10 pounds of nitrogen to be put on the ground? Right here is a formula showing how you can calculate the marginal product when nitrogen is between 0 and 10 pounds per acre. And we calculate it simply by using the formula. Let's see, the change in output when we go from 0 to 10 pounds of nitrogen, we go from 23 to 25 bushels per acre. So 25 minus 23. The change in inputs went from 0 to 10 pounds, so 10 minus 0, and this will give us our marginal product. We have 2 up here, 10, so 0.2. And we interpret it by this. That marginal product tells us that when N goes up by 1 pound per acre, yield, it doesn't have to go up, but in this case yield does go up by 0.2 bushels per acre. So I'm going to go ahead and write 0.2 down here. Okay. Now let's look at what happens when we go from 10 pounds of nitrogen per acre to 20 pounds. We see that yield goes up from 25 to 30.5. So we come up here to our formula, change in output, 30.5 minus 25. The change in input use, 20 minus 10 equals 0.55. What this tells us is that when nitrogen use goes up by 1 pound per acre, yield goes up by 0.55 bushels per acre. So I'll go ahead and write new marginal product right here. So you see what we're doing is we're adding a new column to this table, marginal product. You can see marginal product went from 0.2 to 0.55. During this range, 0 to 20 pounds of nitrogen per acre, nitrogen is becoming more productive the more that you use it. Now that you see how we do these calculations, I'm going to go ahead and fill in the table. You just use the same formula that we've been using thus far, and you get marginal products of this. Marginal products go 0.2 to 0.55 to 0.25 to 0.2 to 0.1 to 0.02. Now that we have these marginal products done, we can start talking about where stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 of production might be in this table. Remember that stage 1 is where nitrogen is productive and becoming even more productive. So that's in stage 1. So to figure out where stage 1 is, we want to look in the column of marginal products and find the interval over which marginal product is rising. And we see here it's in 2 rows. When we go from 0 to 10 and then 10 to 20, the marginal product is increasing. It goes from 0.2 to 0.55. Therefore, over this interval is stage 1. Now stage 2 is where nitrogen is productive but becoming less productive the more you use. So stage 2 would be where the marginal product is still positive. You put down more nitrogen, you get more yield, but the marginal product is declining the more nitrogen you use. Well, it looks to me, if you look over here, we see marginal product go from 0.55 to 0.25 to 0.2 to 0.1 to 0.02. Over that entire region, marginal product is positive but declining. So stage 2 is going to be the rest of this table. Now notice that there is overlap between stage 1 and stage 2. That's because we're only observing nitrogen over regions like 0 to 10, 10 to 12, instead of like nitrogen is 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So over the green region is stage 2. And what this means is that stage 1 and stage 2, stage 1 turns into stage 2 somewhere between 10 pounds of nitrogen per acre and 20 pounds, but we don't know exactly where. So we say stage 1 and stage 2 is occurring simultaneously at between 10 and 20 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Now there's stage 3, but evidently we don't seem to have stage 3 here. Stage 3 N is not productive. What that means is when you're in stage 3, if you apply more nitrogen, yield actually falls, which means marginal product would be negative. And nowhere in these marginal products that we calculated is the marginal product negative. Therefore, stage 3 does not exist in these data. You'd have to apply more nitrogen than 60 pounds before you reach stage 3. Now let me show you the type of multiple choice question you might see regarding something like this. Consider this question. Stage 1 of production begins at what level of nitrogen use and ends at what level of nitrogen use? Well, stage 1, we see that it begins at 0 pounds of nitrogen and ends at 20 pounds. At least that's how we're going to answer the question. And then stage 2 of production, it begins at what amount of nitrogen and ends at what amount of nitrogen. And according to our table up there, we saw stage 2 begins somewhere between 20 and 30, so we answer that by saying 20. And it ends at somewhere greater than 60 pounds of nitrogen. If you just put 60 there, that would be okay also. We don't know exactly where stage 2 ends in these data. And when you're answering a table, when you're answering questions like this from a table, like the one we just looked at, remember it's okay for the end of one stage to, the number for the end of one stage to be the number beginning at another stage. That's okay. And that's the end of this video on the 3 stages of production and marginal product. One very key thing to just remember here is a way of summarizing, a way of memorizing which stage you're in for marginal products. When you see marginal product is greater than 0 and the marginal product is rising, that is stage 1. When you see marginal product is greater than 0 and falling, that's stage 2. And when marginal product is less than 0, that is stage 3. Hope you found this video useful.